Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our monthly meeting here again tonight. Special welcome to our guest speaker tonight and her family, Betty Huf and her husband Colin and their son Daniel at the back there. They came here today and they've travelled 500 k's to get here. So, got another 500 k's to get home. So we'll speak about Betty shortly. Now, there's a couple other announcements and exciting things happening around the place, and perhaps firstly I'll get Lois to speak about, well, you want to speak about that first, the book? Okay.
Good evening. How many of you remember back to 1985 when David Schubert published Carvel's People, the story of the Prussian Lutheran refugees presented in their own words through their journals, diaries, memoirs and other contemporary documents, the story of their persecution, of their immigration and their settlement in South Australia. That story and the term Carvel's People has been generally acknowledged as the foundation story of the Lutheran Church in Australia. There were about 500 of them at that time. How many thousands of descendants do they have by now? Are you one of them? How many of you? I hope someone's counting. I can't see. But tonight, FoLA is very proud to present the first substantial new research and retelling of that story for 40 years. And again, it's by a Schubert, John Schubert, and this one is called The Other Carvels, Brandenburg to the Barossa. The other Carvels then. When Pastor Carvel came to Australia, to South Australia, he brought with him his family. His parents, Albrecht and Sabine, his three brothers, Friedrich, Ferdinand and Daniel, his sister, Charlotte, who here in Australia married Carvel's right-hand man, the leading layman of the Clemsig congregation, and who also was a major leader of the migration over there, here in South Australia. And in fact, of course, Charlotte and Carvel and August Fiedler became the forebears of the only Carvel descendants in Australia. Not descendants of Pastor Carvel, but of the Carvel family. It's no accident that these two really significant books, detailed books about that Carvel migration, that first Prussian Lutheran migration, was written by Schuberts. They are one of the clans of the descendants of Charlotte Carvel and August Fiedler. The other family, many of you may know too, the Hofs. So John Schubert's book, approaches the story of the same foundation story from the different perspective of telling the story of these members of the Carvel family, from whom moved with Pastor Carvel from Berlin to Clemsig in Brandenburg, and then from Clemsig in Brandenburg to Clemsig in South Australia and on to Langmile. John follows each of them when they appear. There is not a huge documentation about most of them. They appear when they play a role in one event or other of this whole migration, persecution and migration story. And then they disappear into the background. But each time, the story of what they do sheds light on the story of what was happening, both back there in Prussia and on the way and here. Each plays a different role, each sheds light into a different area of that story. The one who remains prominent through the whole story is August Fiedler, who drafts letters to the king back in Prussia, negotiates with with Angus in London, and so on, and then is the first to settle at Clemzig, proposes the settlement at Langmile, and is one of the first to establish the community there in the Barossa. So you can see it's a very rich retelling of that story. And of course, there are the special additions to the family. The two women who became in turn, naturally, Frau Pastor Carvel, who spent years at the side of Pastor Carvel. Most of you, I think, will have heard some of the stories of Anne Pennyfeather. This book will tell you much more. New insights, new findings, a new background story, and a much more rounded story than we have, even though there is always this fact that women's stories are so slightly documented. The other story, of course, is that of his marriage to his housekeeper, Beate Irgang, in Langmile, with whom he spent the last 9 years of his life. And John tells that story too, with great empathy. So we have fascinating stories we have to tell you here. John has gone back to research the early sources from Lutheran archives. He recalls that it was back in 2008 that he made his first approach to Lutheran archives. What material could they give him about the Carvels? So 2008, he started working on this story. A few years later, he gave a talk to Friends of Lutheran Archives, and we anticipated that we would, as we often did, publish his research, his story, in the FoLA journal. It outgrew the FoLA journal. It got too big. So now we have this book instead, the result of those years of extensive and meticulous research and writing. So he went back to the early sources. One of them was the Angus papers in the State Library. And for any of you who happen to come out, whose forebears came out to Australia on the Prince George, you will have the special treat of being able to see the signature of the forebear, your ancestor, the head of your household, who signed the contract with Angus in Plymouth when the Prince George called in there to pick up Pastor Carvel on their way to Australia. But of course, he's also looked at much more recent research or recent research or newly available records. He's scoured the archives of the world, and so he has been able to present a really rich new telling of the story. The book, he has given his research. The book is available for sale tonight. The History Trust gave Friends of Lutheran Archives a grant, which covered most of the printing costs. So the $35 you pay, most of it will go to Friends of Lutheran Archives to support projects of the Lutheran Archives. The books will be available for sale after the meeting. If you don't have cash, leave your name, email or address, and we will organise something for you. So that is our proud new treasure for you to enjoy. However, getting closer to our meeting tonight, our meeting next week, not next week, next month, is again a guest from Victoria. The two guests from Victoria. The September meeting will be a little earlier than usual to fit in their academic schedules. Professor Barry Judd, Deputy Vice-Chancellor Indigenous from Melbourne University, and Professor Catherine Ellinghaus, historian from La Trobe University, have been working together on a project on the work of missionary F.W. Albrecht at Fink River Mission, specifically on his education scheme. Their talk is entitled Enlightened Aboriginal Futures and the Sandhill Girl, the story of two books and the importance of writing as kin. The first book outlines their thinking, a case study on missionary Albrecht's work a case study in the transfer of Enlightenment thinking, they say, to Australia, shown in missionary Albrecht's keen enthusiasm to offer a Western education to particularly girls from Central Australia, under the condition that, two conditions, that it was, that they chose it was their own choice to go away from home to receive this education, and that they were then also given the opportunity and encouraged to remain in contact with their Indigenous origins. The second book, Sandhill Girl, is written by Barry Judd's mother, Lorna Wilson, who was one of the girls who were chosen to go for an education to St Paul's Lutheran College in Walla Walla. She writes the story of how she benefited from that scheme. So those two academic writers will be here to tell us the story of what they have found in their research on this particular project of the Fink River Mission. Thank you. Sorry.
Thanks, Lois. Fount of knowledge, isn't she? Yes, with John Schubert's book, we thought it was never going to get finished because he's always finding extra things that he needs to include in it. And so it's good that it's come to this point. And can I welcome John to the meeting tonight because he's wanting to watch it live stream and from Melbourne. So, John, I hope that you're happy with the presentation that was made. So those books will be available out in the passageway and see Helen afterwards, $35 a book. Now, to increase your knowledge further of things, here's another book that's released Sunday week ago by the Wen Sorb Society, the Wens in South Australia, their Heritage Trail. Those of you who know a bit about what's happening in the Wendish scene, there are 6 heritage markers around the state of Wendish interest. At Hope Valley here in northeast of Adelaide, Rosedale, Ebenezer, Noikuru, St Kitts and Peters Hill. And so this book tracks all of those places and information about those districts. It's a monumental task of the committee and we're very pleased that it's come to fruition. And Lyle Kupke's got these books available. Just put your hand up, Lyle. They're available from him tonight for $25 a book. So that's the second book that you can buy tonight. Now, tonight's presentation. There's a bit of information up there about Betty, but there's more about Betty than that. She graduated as a school teacher and taught in both Lutheran and public schools for many years, and for about the last 20 years of her educational career, she was a teacher to children with disabilities and special needs. So I imagine that was quite a challenging task, perhaps also quite rewarding. But in later life, she became more and more interested in history things. She's been a presenter here, I think, twice before, and she really exudes history knowledge wherever she goes. So she lives at Tarrington. I've been to their home already, and they've actually stayed at our house in the Barossa as well when they led a group tour over here, and we've sort of kept in contact since that time. But she takes a particular interest in local history in the Western Districts of Victoria in particular. She's also chairperson these days of the Wendish Heritage Society in Australia. It's the Melbourne branch of the Heritage Society based in Melbourne. And Tarrington's not really next door. So to get to a meeting to chair it, she has to travel 300 k's each way. It's quite a commitment, isn't it? And she's had that job for a while and does it really well. And still further afield from that, she and Colin have led overseas tours, heritage tours to Germany and Poland in particular. And their most recent one was in April this year to sort of see the Easter celebrations in the Wendish areas over there, and they've done that one before. When we were looking at a topic, it suggested that perhaps we could explore more about the Germans' influence in Mount Gambier, and we thought Betty was the obvious choice, and when I first approached her, she wasn't quite so sure about it. And so her name was mentioned when the two Wendish Heritage Societies and the Mount Gambier congregation put a plaque on Pastor Kapler's grave in Mount Gambier, and that's about what most of us know from a German perspective, and I won't steal her thunder on that one. But in accepting the challenge, Betty's found an enormous amount of information that's relevant to this topic, and we look forward to your presentation here tonight. So thank you, Betty.
Okay. I don't know, do I need to, I don't think I need.
Yeah, we do because of recording purposes. Or
Do
do you
it.
want to use a headset?
I've got a microphone on.
Oh, you have?
Yeah, is it sufficient?
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't realise that.
Yeah, I do. I do. Now I just need to get myself, just going to bring this over here. Yeah, I have, it's gone to sleep. There we go. Whoops. Come on. Right. Well, you can all hear me, and my voice is okay for the recording? Is it? Yes? All right. Well, here we are. Here I am after, I've got a bit of echoing. Is that okay? I don't know. All right, we'll proceed. Well, thank you for inviting me to be your guest speaker tonight. I'd just like to mention a few things before I start in order to clarify what I'm going to say. So, as Jeff said, my research into this topic came about firstly in 2019 when the Wendish Heritage Society Australia decided to visit Mount Gambier for their country tour, which we hold annually on the Labor Day weekend in March. It's in March. During these tours, we visit places connected to German settlers and residents of the location, and each tour usually has a dinner on the Saturday evening at which a presentation about the locality and its connection to German heritage is shown. So this presentation that I'm about to show you tonight began its life as the 2019 effort. But it was revisited and improved when the Society made another visit to Mount Gambier in 2024, the reason for which will become clear later, and I think we've already heard. I'm just going to make this a bit higher. I think this is how it goes. Ah, lovely. That's better. Right, don't have to stretch my eyes so far. Right, as I'm no expert on this topic and had basically no knowledge of the Germans of Mount Gambier and its district, I've had to research quite a number of resources to gain information that I will present to you tonight. And I must say, I have never lived in Mount Gambier. I don't have any relatives who live in Mount Gambier, and probably in my whole life I've been to Mount Gambier about 15 times. So therefore I apologise if I unintentionally make some errors due to my unfamiliarity with the district. Also, I must apologise for my mispronunciation of German names. Due to my being unfamiliar with the families and individuals I'll be talking about tonight. So here are some of the references that I have used to put this presentation together, and I'm acknowledging using the history of the Lutheran Church in Mount Gambier, Mount Gambier, the city around the lake, and I got quite a lot of information out of this book, which is called Second to None, published in 1988, and it talks about a lot of the families, quite a few of them were German families, so that was very helpful. I've also looked at the photographs from the State Library, and I must acknowledge that I've used a few from their collection, online collection. I've looked at the files of Lutheran archives, good old trove digitised newspapers. I couldn't cope without them anymore. And I also looked at a paper about the Wehl family, the Wehl family, I think they say in Mount Gambier. Is anyone here from Mount Gambier? No. Oh, how do you pronounce Wehl? It is Wehl, just Wehl. The lady beside you is from... Okay, thank you. I'll just say Wehl then, anglicised. There's a paper on the internet about that calls the Wehl family of South Australia and their botanical connections with dear Uncle Baron Ferdinand von Müller. And that's a paper by John Dowie, Tom May, Sarah Marosky and Lucy Smith. I think I've covered and so I've used some also family histories that I haven't mentioned there. I'll also say at this point that the German population and influence in the Mount Gambier area is a huge topic and far too big to cover in this short space of time. So consequently, I've limited my time frame from the early settlement era of the 1840s until the end of the 19th century. This is to about 1900. So having said that, I will have to admit that I have just scraped the surface of this topic. So I've called this presentation Farmers, Entrepreneurs, Lutheran Clergymen and a Doctor. just to put in a bit of German for you. Right, the Boandic people are the traditional owners of the Mount Gambier region, with Bunganjid their main language. European contact began in 1823 at Rivoli Bay, leading to displacement of the Boandic and the erosion of their language, culture and traditions. Oops. Stephen Henty, a pastoralist and one of the founders of Portland in Victoria, was the first white man to explore the crater lakes of Mount Gambier in the late 1830s. By 1841, he had stocked the area with sheep and cattle. It didn't go too well, so they didn't. He only lasted there 2 or 3 years and took his flocks and things back to Victoria. A monument now commemorates the site of Stephen Henty's hut between the Browns and Valley Lakes to mark the first permanent residence occupied by white settlers in the district. I did come across a little comment in one of the history papers from the Mount Gambier Historical Society, I think, that said that they don't really count Henty's his residence and this monument as the first settlement in Mount Gambier because he's from Victoria, he wasn't South Australian. So, yeah. So in 1918, nevertheless, they put a stone over the original fireplace where the hut was, and then they added this obelisk in 1940. It's just a photograph of the blue lake of Mount Gambier, and in the background you can see a little patch of water, which is probably, I don't know which one, Leg of Mutton Lake, some of the other valley lakes, and the city itself is sort of to the right at the back there. All right, this is I could not get a nice map of Mount Gambier, I'm afraid, and my little red spot won't work on this screen. So, yes, I'm afraid I can't really point to where the places are, but some of these little settlements, and they're not primarily German specifically, but there are other, English people and whatnot at these places too, but the Germans settled together at places called Square Mile, OB Flat, Yarl, Yarl Paddock, Glen Burnie, Claraville, Millell, Drop, and the Compton is another one that I haven't got on that list, I see. Some unusual names. OB Flat. Where did that name come from? OB Flat. OB Flat was named after a gentleman whose initials were OB on his cattle. I can't remember what his surname was. I've got it written here somewhere, but now I can't find it. Not to worry. So that's where the OB came from, because his cattle are wandering around with the brand OB. So I suppose someone just said, well, that's near the flat where all the OB cattle are. Millell, and I haven't written that properly now. That has a hyphen in the middle of the word. Don't know where that name comes from. And quite a few lived at Drop. So I don't know, can't work out where Drop came from. It's an interesting name. I wouldn't mind saying I lived at Drop. Just sounds different, doesn't it? Right, let's look at some of the first Germans to arrive at the Mount, and a lot of the locals call it the Mount. They don't say Mount Gambier, the Mount. Possibly the first German to permanently settle, there was Johann Friedrich Tollner, who arrived in June 1849. He purchased land at Compton and established a farm that he called Rose Hill. Dr Eduard Wehl also arrived about the same time in 1849. Carl Bloom, who the Huf family might be familiar with because he was involved in the Hufs moving to Victoria. Carl Bloom passed through Mount Gambier in 1851 looking for land, and after several years at the goldfields, he returned in 1854 and purchased some farming property. In 1854, Charles Crummell started a blacksmith and was the first to make iron ploughs in Mount Gambier. Now, the Wendish families of Albert, Berger, Deutscher, Hundrack, Petschel and Wrench, and the German family of Huf passed through Mount Gambier in May 1852 on their way to Portland, where they intended to purchase agricultural land. So Mount Gambier didn't appeal to them, they went on to Portland. And I mentioned Carl Bloom before. He was in that little group in 1851 who went on to find a path through Mount Gambier to Portland and just do a little bit of a look around to see whether it really was worth moving over there to buy farming land. So Christiana Hiller, who was in that group as a young woman, wrote in her memoirs, "During the last week of our trek, we passed through Mount Gambier, which consisted of one hotel and 10 small houses, each of which had one door and 2 windows and a chimney. But most of them were empty, as the owners had gone to the diggings. All the people we saw were barefooted, as they were unable to buy any boots." Whoops, there we go. Mount Gambier's first hotel, it wasn't owned by a German, by a man named Bing, apparently. In 1855, Julius Heinemann opened his first saddlery business in the district. Adolf Kieselbach arrived in 1855, later opening a bakery. 1855, Friedrich Hirth began farming in the district. August Adolf Bernhard Holtger came from the goldfields in 1855 to become Dr Wehl's farm manager and opened a general store in 1861 in partnership with Heinrich Rischbeth, I suppose it should be. Johann Schinkel opened the first butcher shop in 1858 in partnership with a Mr Milton. Christian Gust drove a team of 8 bullocks to Mount Gambier in 1859. Johann and Joachim Ruwalt trekked overland from Adelaide with several bullock teams in 1859 and farmed at Gambier East and Jarl. And also in 1859, Johann Lang, or Langy, depending on where you live, later purchased land in the Jarl area. Gottlieb Patzel arrived in 1860 and farmed at Square Mile. Andreas Birkerfeld arrived in 1860 and he bought land at OB Flat. George Grave commenced the saddlery business, 1863. Friedrich Wilhelm Alexander Rinnecke arrived in 1860 and opened a boot store. He sailed on a little boat called the Ant from Adelaide to Robe, and then it took him a month in his bullock wagon to get to Mount Gambier, which seems a long time because the Wends did it in 4 weeks from Hoffnungstal. So Karl Engelbrecht established a store in Port Macdonald in 1866, but he moved to the Mount a couple of years later. This is what Mount Gambier looked like in 1863, and this is a photo from the State Library collection. And that's far too small for you to read, I believe. But they're just some of the names. I'm sorry, I didn't have time to do it in larger font so that you could read it. Now, I've called my presentation Farmers, Entrepreneurs, Lutheran Clergymen and a Doctor. But I'm going to start with the doctor, because the doctor was involved in everything. He fits into farming, he fits into the entrepreneur box. He wasn't a Lutheran clergyman, but he certainly was very involved in the establishing Lutheran Church in Mount Gambier. So I'm doing him first. And the doctor I'm talking about, of course, is Dr Johann Dr Eduard Wehl. He arrived in 1849 when he was aged 25, and he worked as a doctor amongst the scattered population. But he went to the gold rush in 1852 and returned to Mount Gambier in 1853 and recommenced his medical profession. He was very interested in industrial pursuits. I think I've got something out of order here, but that doesn't matter. And started the first flour mill in 1857. That was hand-driven, and then he introduced horsepower in 1858 and converted it to steam in 1859. And this is not the original the mill, this is a successor mill that he built in 1862. And there's the old mill steaming away there in the distance. He commenced farming in 1868 and at one time owned 3,000 acres. So he really went into farming and new farming practices. He was on the district council and its first chairman. He was member of all the leading societies, Oddfellows, Masons, Foresters, the German Club. He was also instrumental in the building of St. Martin's Lutheran Church. Clara Christiana Marie Wehl nee Müller was born in Rostock, Mecklenburg in 1833 and emigrated to South Australia in 1847 when she was aged 14 with her sister Bertha and her brother Ferdinand von Müller. And I think you know who he is. In 1848, the siblings moved to the Bugle Ranges where Clara began collecting botanical specimens, and in 1853 she moved with her brother and sister to Melbourne where they lived in a cottage in the Melbourne Botanic Gardens. Clara Müller and Eduard Wehl married on the 27th of October 1853 in Richmond, Victoria. They had a family of 15 children, 12 of whom survived to adulthood. In 1866, the Whels erected a large residence on the corner of Wheel and Commercial Streets with an orchard, beautiful garden and tennis courts. And they called their house Maya Maya, Mia Mia, and that's what it looks like today. It's still there. After her marriage, Clara's interest in botany and botanical collecting continued, she being primarily interested in algae and other marine plants in the Mount Gambier area. Although not formally trained in botany, she collected for at least 46 years from 1848 to 1894, and with her collection being held at several institutions. Dr Eduard and Clara and 6 of their 12 children collected specimens, primarily for Clara's brother, Ferdinand von Müller, who was the director of the Melbourne Botanic Gardens. The daughters Henrietta and Marie illustrated plants and fungi, of which some 300 illustrations have survived. And I've just got a few examples there, and that comes from that online paper that I was talking about. About 1,200 herbarium specimens collected by the Wehl family have been located, with most being held in the National Herbarium at Victoria, the majority of which were collected in the vicinity of Mount Gambier and Lake Bonny. The family is commemorated in 3 taxa, and you all know what that is, don't you? Botanical specifications or classifications, yeah. So Clara in the marine algae classification, Edward and Clara in another genus, plant genus, and Marie in fungi. Oops, did I? Yeah. Right, Dr Wehl retired in 1873 due to failing health, and he moved with his family to Millicent, where he conducted a limited medical practice. After her husband's death in 1876, Clara and her family bought a grazing property near Millicent, which they named Ehrenbreitstein, something like that. Clara later moved into Millicent, where she spent the last years of her life with one of her sons. Dr Eduard Wehl died from high datids in Mount Gambier on the 11th of February 1876 at the age of 53, so quite young, and was buried in the Lake Terrace Cemetery following a funeral attended by an an estimated 2,000 mourners. Clara survived her husband by 25 years and died after suffering a brain bleed at Millicent in 1901 when she was aged 68. And she's buried in the Millicent Cemetery. Now, I have a little bit of information about them. Some interesting facts about the Wehl family. Although they were staunch Lutherans, Dr. Wehl was buried by a Presbyterian and Mrs. Wehl by an Anglican minister. So I mean, if you go back and look at the dates, I guess you can figure out perhaps the pastors were away or whatever, I don't know, but 1876, can't say. Of their 15 children, 3 died in infancy, 7 passed their 90th year, 2 reaching 98, the others 94, 93, another one 93, 92, 91. The average age of the 12 children at their deaths was a remarkable 84 years. Dr. Wehl was born in 1823 and his last surviving child died in 1974, so that's 151 years later. The Wehl family have been remembered in Mount Gambier by the naming of a number of streets. Wehl Street, of course, was named after the doctor himself, but Bertha, Eleanor, George and William are named after their children, and Clara Wehl, of course, after Mrs. Wehl, his wife. The farmers. Let's have a look at the farmers. Here we go. OB Flat. Leschke, Schubert, Kubank, Boschen, Bruvold, Langer, Peel, Kannenberg, Schinkel. Oh, there's an interesting spelling of Sudholz. Schlitter, Schluter, Bergfeld, Plenges, is it? How do you pronounce that name? Platt, Tabor or Tauber, Lange, Nitschke, Zippel, and then at Square Mile you've got Gala, Patzel, Verwick, Rossler, Herbst, Unger and Puls. This is a Sudholz family home at Square Mile, and you won't be able to see their faces, but Gertrude and Mary Sudholz are there, Ted Unger and Ossie Sudholz. Here we go, drop. Broist or Brust, Fiedler, Kohler, Polner, Krieg, Nichterlein, Sandmeyer and Myers, Millel had Morser and Kuhl, Compton, Tollner, Schmidt, Sandmeyer, Sazanowski, Walsgott, Bors. These are not complete lists, but the ones that I have found in my research. There could be others, I don't know. Possibly the first German to permanently settle in the Mount Gambier area, as I said earlier, was Johann Friedrich Tollner, who arrived in 49. He purchased land at Compton and established this farm known as Rose Hill. And you can see they had quite an establishment there. The Sazanowski family of Compton arrived in 1862 and they selected a timbered block which they cleared for cropping. Portions of this home, constructed of thick upright slabs, still existed in 1988 when this book was published. So it would be nice to think that it's still there. None of the family of 5 sons and 3 daughters married, so that name is gone. Jarl. Gladigo, Lange, Hirth, Lehman, Beckman, Coop, Doman, Ruwald and Jarl Paddock, Krause, Nitschke, Roseville, Hirth, Grosser and Schmidt. This is a photograph of the Jarl cheese and butter factory, about 1890. And the Schmidt family of Roseville, in front of their home. The home at Jarl, built by Karl August Lauber and his wife Dorothea, That was only sold in 1924 when the couple left the district. Now we've got Glen Burnie, Ruvolt, Grabowski, Rui, Jenske, Grosser. Claraville actually is in Mount Gambier itself, but I've put it there, so I'll read them. Bremer, Gabart, Lutz, Plonges, Nikkei, Wendelborn and Noski. Johann Friedrich Hirth came to Mount Gambier in 1855 with his wife and children and cleared his land to undertake mixed farming. His son Friedrich Wilhelm married Caroline Hermina Adolfina Kohler in 1864, and they built a small settler's cottage on part of his father's property that was bordered by the Casterton and Dola roads, originally made of weatherboards with a shingle roof and a calico ceiling and a huge fireplace. The Hirths raised a family of 10 children on their mixed farm, and this little cottage is all that remains of the many sheds and buildings that comprise the Hirths farm. The building is easily seen from the road. We saw this when we were over there in 2019, I think. The Poyker family showed us that little cottage. Let's have a look at entrepreneurs. I have called the businessmen of the town entrepreneurs because in those early days, there was nobody else who was a blacksmith and there's nobody else who made shoes, very few shopkeepers. So they're all entrepreneurs. Johann Gottlieb Lindner, he came in 1851 and selected land on the northern edge of the mount. I think it's what they call North Boundary Road or North Gambier Road, something like that. He set up a blacksmith trade and had a farm also and an orchard. His eldest son, Karl Traugott, and his brother farmed together after his death. Descendants of C.T. Lindner owned property in the Millel, Mingbul and Kalangadoo areas, and I think that descendants still own some of those properties. This was the Lindner home, North Terrace, that's what they call it. North Terrace in Mount Gambier, about 1860 is that. And this is the second home that they built. And Lindner's had a fruit shop. This is 1906. I couldn't work out who B. Lindner was, but one of the descendants, obviously, and they like selling apricots. Cheap. Shinkles, I mentioned him earlier. Shinkles and Milton's butcher shop was the first to be established in Mount Gambier. And this picture is from an 1887 painting of the shop from a photograph taken in the 1860s. Shinkle was a butcher from 1858 to 69, and then he sold the shop and he went farming at Obi Flat. Gabart South Australian Brewery. I think Mr. Gabart did quite well. He started in 1862 and he operated his brewery until his death in 1890. He also opened a brewery in Penola in partnership with Ernst Seelinger. He also owned the Travellers Rest Hotel at Allendale, Farmers Inn Hotel Mount Gambier, Tarpina Hotel, and he built the Southeastern Hotel. Just an advertisement. Prime Ales, Extra Stout, Bottled Ale, a splendid stock on hand, cordials, bitters, vinegar, etc. All from the South Australian Brewery and Cordial Factory in Mount Gambier. The Jens Hotel. Johannes Matthias Jens worked as a barman at local hotels. He paid £3,000 for a half an acre on the corner of Commercial and Watson Streets, later enlarging the site. The Jens Hotel opened in 1883 and was operated by him until his death in 1915, which happened to be the hotel's 31st anniversary. His son Henry Jens continued the business, which stayed in the Jens family until 1961. And when we were there in 2019, we had dinner at the Jens Hotel because of its connections, with its beautiful verandas, the lace. Actually, I think Mr. Jens was not really German, he was Danish, from Holstein. George Reuben Koenig's Central Cafe, Mount Gambier. Now, I have put this slide next because on the right-hand side there you can see that the Jens Hotel. That's the verandas of Jens Hotel on the right, and then Reuben Koenig's, it's a restaurant, straight ahead. And those buildings are still there, which is lovely. They advertised as a baker and confectioner. Of course, they weren't in that grand building at that time, but they continued the business, and happened to find a couple of photographs of the inside of their shop, there with the tables and chairs there, and then their kitchen. Adolf Kieselbach arrived in Mount Gambier in 1855 and started this bakery and built a coffee palace. August Holtger and Heinrich Rischbeths. I have trouble with these names, I just admit. An advertisement, we've got an advertisement from 1864 for their general store on Commercial Street. Commercial Street is the main street in Mount Gambier, and it is very long. It's so long that they have Commercial Street West and Commercial Street East. It's very long because Colin and I and Daniel marched down that in the Christmas parade when we were members of the Tarrington Brass Band, and it's a good mile more to play music all the way down while you've got people cheering. Yeah. So let's see what these two sell. In this advertisement, they are alerting us to the fact that they have just opened a choice assortment of seasonable goods. And these are the goods listed in that sloping print there. Flannels, blankets, winsies. Do you know what winsies are? I had to look this up because I didn't know what a winsie was. I gather it's something like, well, it sounds like wind cheater, doesn't it? A little bit like that. But it's material that's made from cotton or linen on the warp and wool on the weft. So it's a combination of cotton and wool or linen and wool. So they also sell knickerbockers, mantles, robes, paletots. What are paletots? Gentlemen's coats, okay, and jackets. And they sell ladies' felt and straw hats of every description, gents' felt hats and caps, boys and youths, the same. Slops of every description. Now, I don't know, I didn't look up and see what slops are. I don't know. Also, a good assortment of paper hangings, toys, concertinas and accordions, etc. This is the Reichbeth's family home in Wyatt Street, and they owned this property from 1860 to 1950, and I think we can see enough to see they've got quite a grand looking garden there. J.M. Wendt jeweller. I think you all will know J.M. Wendt the jeweller. He had a business here in Adelaide. Yes, I am in Adelaide. And he started a branch of his store in 1869 in Mount Gambier. In 1887, he sold it to his manager, August Lenau. Now, when I was looking at that advertisement there, I could see that insignia up the top there, which is a royal appointment insignia. And I thought, hang on, he's German, he lives in Adelaide, how did he get that? How did he get that? Well, so I went looking. Wendt was a native also of Holstein. So he wasn't actually German, he was Danish. In 1848, Holstein was conquered by Prussia, and he found German rule so distasteful that he emigrated to South Australia, arriving in 1851, and he was naturalised as a British citizen in 1864. Facts which he used to deflect the popular ill feeling against people of German origin during World War I. So here is how he got that royal insignia, the royal appointment. He produced 70 gold medals and 100 silver medals for the Adelaide Jubilee International Exhibition in 1867, which was held in conjunction with the visit to Adelaide of Prince Alfred. His company produced 4 presentation caskets for the Prince, who honoured him with the royal appointment as jeweller to His Royal Highness in the colony of South Australia. There you go. Because I thought, oh, that's most unusual to see that here. August Lanau, the jeweller, worked for Wendt in Adelaide for 5 years, and then he came to Mount Gambier as the manager and bought the business, retired to Adelaide in 1914. But he's in the same building, you can see. William Wehl. In 1863, William Wehl, who is the brother of Dr Wehl, established a tannery and fellmongering business in Edward Street. Listen to this. Immediately opposite the Lutheran church. How good would that be to have a tannery and a fellmongering opposite the church? But anyway, it was operated by family members until 1883. What is fellmongering? Oh, I was hoping no one would ask. Oh, yes. It is cleaning wool, yeah. Probably something to do with tanning anyway, with hides. And they've got a bark mill there too. Just a couple of other photographs. William started it, Wilhelm, but Carl Wehl took it over and then they sold it. Now, I'm just going to mention here that the Victorian steam flour mill in Commercial Street West was erected in 1862, as I've said before, by Dr Wehl. His brother William managed the business for a number of years, and he purchased it himself for £2,300 in 1869. Now just add here, oh, by the way, to the left-hand side of the mill, you can see a double-storey home. That's Mia, the house of Dr Wehl. That's where he lived, quite close to the flour mill, because he owned all of that land, I guess, and he just built his things on his land. The Wehl brothers, both of them were experiencing financial difficulties in 1870, which resulted in William selling the flour mill and Edward experiencing large farming losses. He had to sell most of his land, those 3,000 acres. On March the 1st, 1871, there was an advertisement in the local paper stating that Dr Wehl's dwelling at 2 Wehl Street was for sale with stables, an orchard and a large garden, while the adjoining mill was also for sale, both properties being of 1.5 acres size. Blocks of land owned by Dr Wehl were also for sale, most of them later sold in acre lots at £20 to £31 an acre. So a lot of the land in Claraville, which is where the mill was and where the Mia home is, were owned on land owned by Dr. Wehl. So I said earlier on, in 1875, Dr. Wehl moved to Millicent because of ill health. I think he moved to Millicent because he had to sell up in Mount Gambier, and he wasn't terribly well because he was suffering from hydatids. He did not know he had it. So he suffered from it for a while when he went to Millicent. But he died in Mount Gambier, it said, so he must have come back for medical treatment. But I think the real reason why he went to Millicent was not that he wanted to retire necessarily, but that he had to retire to a smaller place. Okay. Now we've got a blacksmith, Eduard Wehl, in Commercial Street West. So he's down the same end of the street as the steam mill. Julius Heinemann, a saddler. He opened his business in 1861, but sold it in 1886, and he did go to Germany, back to Germany, due to ill health. He wrote letters. He was friends with Mr. Jens from the hotel, and I did read a letter or two that he wrote back, which they published in the newspaper, as they did in those days. If you got letters from people, sometimes they were published in the paper, and he was not well. We've got Martin Habner with that gorgeous little carriage there, carriage and wagon builder, and Christian Gust, who makes ploughs and harrows. Some of the other advertisements that I found, Otto Klug, who's a watchmaker, another jeweller, Theodore Studemann, who was a cabinet maker and also the undertaker. That was quite common in those days, that the cabinet makers also made the coffins. Karl von Bülow was the veterinary surgeon, and Herr Schrader is a teacher of violin and guitar. I think actually he might have been a visiting teacher to Mount Gambier, not always there. Karl Engelbrecht. Karl Engelbrecht was an entrepreneur in the true sense of the word, I would say. He established a store in Port Macdonald for a start, but he moved to Mount Gambier in 1868 to open a general business and wine depot because he thought Mount Gambier was a more progressive town than Port Macdonald. So this advertisement is one that used to appear in the Hamilton Spectator quite a bit. Finest grown colonial wines. I don't think he was producing them himself, but he may be getting them from the Barossa at this stage. I don't know. Anyway, he's selling them. Then, what have I got here? It says, in 1870, the police on Saturday seized a dray load of wine from Engelbrecht and Company of Mount Gambier for crossing the border without paying duty. Okay, so this was quite a story. So I have got the story here that I'll read to you. Mount Gambier wine seizure, says the Evening Journal in Adelaide on the 21st of March, 1870. The Hamilton Spectator reports that although it suits the Treasurer of South Australia to deny that there is any smuggling going on between this colony and Victoria, lest he should be compelled to consent to free trade across the border and an equalisation of tariffs, there are cases occasionally cropping up which go to prove that smuggling does exist and that the intercolonial customs nuisance ought to be abolished. On Monday last, for instance, a dray load of colonial wine from Mr. Engelbrecht, Mount Gambier, South Australia, of course, was seized at Coleraine, Victoria, as the goods were being delivered to customers. The wine had all been sold by sample, and the purchasers say it was to be delivered to them at the risk of the consignor, the consigner. The price, we believe, was 6 shillings and 6pence per gallon, which doesn't leave much margin to the owner if the duty of 3 shillings per gallon was paid. However, we suppose Mr. Engelbrecht could not find a customs officer to which he could pay the duty, and so he had his dray and his contents seized by the police after he had travelled some 50 miles into Victorian territory. By a stretch of liberality, he was allowed to retain his horses, possibly because the police had no means of feeding them. Yeah. A few seizures of this sort would soon open the eyes of the public to the unnatural state of things which treats as foreigners people of one race and nation who are subjects of the same queen and separated only by an imaginary boundary line, which regards as a criminal a man who is only endeavouring to carry on his business by availing himself of the nearest and best market open to him for the disposal of his produce. Mr. Engelbrecht is a respectable and enterprising German tradesman, only partly acquainted with the usage of this country, and we very much question if he had the slightest idea that he was vending his goods and he was committing a breach of law. And then a few weeks later, the wine seizure appears again in the paper. Mr. Davison, solicitor for Mr. Engelbrecht, informs the Mount Gambier Standard that he has succeeded in recovering possession of the wine and dray recently seized by the Victorian authorities for evading customs regulations. The property has been given up on payment of a £5 fine and the amount due as import duty on the wine. So there we go. Mr. Engelbrecht became interested in distilling in the 1880s and he went to the continent. He went to England, Scotland and Ireland with his son, inspecting distilleries and purchasing machinery. But early in the 1880s, he was the first to export butter from South Australia to England. It wasn't a profitable venture for him, so he stopped doing it, but it sowed the seeds for other people to follow on, so he actually was the first. He also established a bacon factory in 1882. Whoops. This is Carl Engelbrecht's distillery. Do you recognise the building? It's the building, the old steam flour mill. Yes, he bought the flour mill and he put his distillery, which he called the Pioneer Whisky Distillery, into that building. And it operated from 1885 to 1901. Engelbrecht continued, he retired in 1900, yes, and he handed over the business to his family, and you can see the home behind the mill there. Guess who lived in the home? Engelbrechts did. I'll show you a photo in a minute. There's an advertisement for the bacon factory. Bacon pigs are purchased in any quantity. At the homestead or delivered to the factory. And I can't, 4pence per pound he's paying. The Pioneer Distillery operated successfully for 17 years, but it ceased to operate in 1902 due to federal tariffs which increased excise duties. So you know that 1901 we became the federal Australia, and the taxes changed and became not profitable for them. Carl himself died in 1914, aged 80. Oh, I haven't got the house with the family. Maybe I flipped over it. No. Now, if you've been to Mount Gambier, you will no doubt have heard of Engelbrecht's Cave. That's not a very good photograph of the cave, but it's a big hole in the ground and the green is sort of ivy growing down the side of the hole. In 1885, when Engelbrecht purchased Wehl's old flour mill and converted it into a whisky distillery, there was a large cave nearby. So he used it for the disposal of waste, such as slimper, which is a caustic byproduct of whisky making distillery, and he also threw bottles down there. Later, the cave was used to dump any kind of rubbish until the late 1950s. Attitudes changed in 1970 and the cleaning of the cave was started by the Lions Club in 1979. Before the cave was opened for the public in 1986, several years of cleaning were necessary. Today the cave is a tourist attraction as well as a cave diving hotspot where enthusiasts can experience underwater diving underneath the city. They don't have to go very far at all. And on our tour in 2019, we went to that cave. Oh, here we go. Here's Maya, the Wehl home, which is now owned by the Engelbrecht family, about 1900. And the family are having afternoon tea in the garden. I have trouble with this name too. Is it Spear, Spear, Spore, Spear? Mr. Spear, the solicitor. Spear? Spear. Thank you. And they also had a barber shop. I'm coming back into 1950 now. We're very late in my time frame. But they had a lovely barber shop with elaborately upholstered leather barber's chairs. And they were selling shaving items as well as shampoos and talcum powder. Theodore Holzberger was a butcher. Oh, that's right, I put this in because I was interested in the prices. Roast beef, best cuts, 4p. Boiling beef, 3p. Steaks are 4p. Chops are 4p. Mutton, hind quarter, 3p. Forequarter, 2p. Legs and loins are 3p halfpenny. A hind quarter of beef per 100 pounds is 25 shillings, and a forequarter of beef, 100 pounds is 20 shillings. No, well, any of my customers who want to leave me for Mr. Newton are required to pay their accounts. So some people must have been going to Mr. Newton because Mr. Newton was more attractive. I put this advertisement in by Mr. Nobes, who is a real estate agent now. He's not German, but he's written this advertisement in German to attract business, of course, from the German-speaking community. The Mount Gambier German Club. I haven't gone into the clubs in very much detail at all, but just a little bit. The German club was founded in 1864 by Friedrich Garthausen of the South Australian Hotel, and Ernest Krull, the Mount Gambier Hotel, and William Wehl, the Victorian steam mill. And they had quite an impressive club room there. Oops, doesn't work behind my back. German club and leader Tafel were enthusiastically supported by Dr. Wehl. Membership grew to be over 80. The club owned a substantial building in Ferris Street that had 13 rooms, which included an assembly hall, a billiard room, and of course, you have to have 2 underground cellars. Don't know what went on there. Whoops. The leader Tafel. And the concert program is far too small for you to read what was on it, but it was in aid of the German Lutheran the German Lutheran church at Claraville. So they're raising money from this concert, which was held in 1868, I think. So Moritz Jonas was their conductor, and members included Ollie, Garthausen, Volbrecht, Krummel, Heinemann, Rischbeith, Bremer, Holzer, Eiserhagen, Reinecke, Blase, Bohm, Ruwold, Heinemann, Leschke. And they performed at concerts, charity concerts, torchlight procession for the South Australian Governor's visit in 1869, amateur concerts, Queen's birthday celebrations, anniversaries of organisations. And I said Moritz Jonas was the conductor. Now I've just done a little page on Moritz because I have a special interest in him. He arrived in Melbourne in 1855 and he lived in Hohkirk for 12 years, which is where I live, Tarrington, it's known as today. He had a store, he operated a store with a Leschke when he was at Hohkirk, but he moved to Mount Gambier. They seem to have both moved at the same time in 1867. Moritz operated a German and English school for 4 years, but then he became solely a music teacher. And he was also the organist and choir conductor of the Lutheran Church and conductor of the Liedertafel. So he was very involved in musical and social functions. He often had his name mentioned as being the accompanist for singers, soloists at concerts. So he would have been well known. But he had no family in Australia. He did not marry, so he had no family at all. So I came across his headstone in the cemetery, just quite by accident. Oh, there you are, Moritz Jonas. And on his headstone they've written, loved and held in the highest esteem by all who knew him, and then the German inscription, which loosely translates to gentle rest his ashes. Herr Schrader had an orchestra, and they also had it, you could buy it on a phonograph, what's more. But the list of all the people in the orchestra, I could not see any German names apart from Herr Schrader. So, and this is just an advertisement for a concert in 1869. It could be the same one that I had before. All right, Germans also became involved in civic affairs, and a number served as councillors for their respective areas. Gambier East and West councillors are pictured in this photograph at a cricket match in 1911. And the following Germans appear: Mr. Schinkel, Speer, Nitschke, August Holzer, Reinhold Patzel, Mr. Sazanowski, and Agaden. So, you know, they didn't isolate themselves from the community, they got involved in things. Now let's have a look at the Lutheran clergymen. We're getting near the end. 2 Lutheran congregations were established in Mount Gambier. First of all, the Evangelical Lutheran Church on Bowendick Terrace, which is ELCA, of course, or ELA. And St Martin's congregation in Edward Street, which was independent Lutheran. Some early members of the Lutheran Church listed there: Studemann, Ruy, Ruwold, Sturm, Reinecke, Schmidt, Vorwick, Unger, Lindner, probably all the names I've mentioned already. Let's look firstly at the Evangelical Lutheran Church on Bowendick Terrace. That was started in 1859 and it closed in 1900. Pastor Sherman from Hohkirk, Victoria, made his first visit in February 1858. The congregation was organised on the 27th of February 1859, a year later. On the 17th of October that year, over 100 people attended a service and 60 adults attended communion. The next visit was in 1860 in February, when Sherman notes some discord amongst the people. And I have just a little excerpt from one of Pastor Sherman's letters that he wrote to his friend Eduard Wehl. in a response to a request this is in 1858 he wrote this letter, the 23rd of January. In response to a request for pastoral visit from Lindner, Hirth and Bloom, Sherman made his first journey to Mount Gambier. That was a distance of 85 miles or 140 kilometres, which took 2 days' travel one way on horseback, and he wrote to Mayer, this is what he wrote. I made use of the holiday period and was at Mount Gambier from Saturday the 23rd until Tuesday the 26th, where a recently arrived small group of German people had assembled. About a dozen communed. However, after it became known that I was there, maybe between 25 and 30 gathered. The majority expressed the hope that a congregation could come into existence if I could periodically visit them. So on his way back to Hoekirk, Sherman goes on to describe a serious mishap that happened to him. On one of the hottest days of the year, he says that it reportedly reached 117 degrees, which is 47 degrees Celsius. While Sherman was taking a slight detour on a path beside the road to avoid walking his horse through the hot sand, she stumbled and fell heavily and broke her neck. Sherman flew a few paces over her head but wasn't injured, and he writes, "You can imagine how devastating it was for me to be in such a howling wilderness quite alone, and my faithful animal, which had carried me here and there for 4 years, dead before my eyes. I still had 8 miles of road to get to the next lodging, which was Casterton. Therefore, quickly saddle, bridle and halter were taken off the horse. But now I took note for the first time how a gracious God had protected me. Often, if the horse had fallen with me, I would have had one leg under her and could get up only after the horse had stood up. Had that been the situation this time, I would have had to perish miserably of thirst in the desert and suffocate in the burning heat of the sun. I would never have got my leg free. I could free the saddle only with the greatest effort, and I arrived at Casterton totally exhausted between 9 and 10 p.m. And then I have got just a little note about the 1859 service. It was attended by over 100 people with 60 communing, and he was astonished at the growth in the number of German families in the area since his last visit, as were the church members themselves, since they, up to that time, hadn't known their strength either. So it sounds like they didn't get together as a group. Well, they hadn't until it was worship that was being organised. All right, here's Mr. Lindner, and when I was looking at this photo of him, an older man, on the cupboard beside him, he's got lined up fruit, because they were growing fruit, and they had a fruit shop too later, so I'm thinking fruit must have been important. I just happened to notice that. Mr. Lindner, together with Mr. Weggy, or Weege, or however, Weggy is it, were elected as the first elders of the congregation. Services were possibly held in their homes prior to the building of the church, and that's the Lindner home again. They did build a church. Land was purchased and the church was built in 1860 and dedicated prior to the Christmas of that year. And this was a description of the church in 1967 from the Border Watch. The church had solid 2 feet thick pug walls, each 30 feet long. The roof of wooden shingles was later covered with iron. The pulpit was 7 feet high with winding steps leading to a 4 feet square platform. It was built of Australian oak. The limestone font remained there. This chapel was still standing in the northwest corner of Bowendick property in 1967. And I've just got an extra note here. The congregation erected this church. However, it was ready for dedication on the 28th of October 1860. However, due to poor mail delivery, Sherman, who was invited to come, received his invitation to take part in the dedication service He didn't get it until after the event was to have taken place. It was then set for the 2nd of December, but again, Sherman couldn't come because at that time he had a confirmation to conduct and his wife wasn't very well at that time. So we assumed that the dedication took place on the 2nd of December. Now in 1861, because they don't have a pastor yet, Pastor Sherman comes across from Hoekirk in Victoria. Mr. Strauber was called for a year to be a teacher, conduct services and read sermons with the prospect of a call to be their pastor if he was prepared to be a candidate for the ministry, but this did not eventuate. And I've just got a note here. Sherman made numerous requests to the Church Council for a pastor in letters written to the President Mayor. Finally, in 1863, Pastor Michael, is that how you pronounce it? Michael, accepted a call to Mount Gambier and was installed as pastor there by Sherman on the 25th of October, thus ending Sherman's ministry to that distant congregation. And here we go, Pastor Michael, the first pastor of the Bowendick Terrace Church. He was ordained in Baden, Germany. Then he went as a missionary to the Gold Coast, Africa. Then he went back as a pastor in Germany. Then he went to India as a missionary. And finally, he comes to Adelaide in 1860 to 1863. Now, he's the only Lutheran pastor to serve on 4 continents. And he came to Mount Gambier in 1863. He was mission-minded and published a hymnal of 60 hymns for use in English-speaking services in Mount Gambier and Millicent. He held services in German language in the morning and English services in the evening. And something I just realised, that he must have travelled to Millicent taking services there. It's just, I don't know where I got that information from that he went to Millicent, but it's quite likely that he did. The next pastor of the independent, Pastor Kepler, did as well. Marshall's sermon for the first celebration in Australian Lutheran circles of the unification of Germany, that's his sermon there. They printed a copy of it. In 1878, that was a fundraiser, wasn't it, Lois, I think? Yeah. You could buy the sermon. I think I got that from one of your talks, Lois. On the 30th of October 1878, Marshall announced his retirement due to old age and partial deafness. So he sold his property, which was 7 acres, so he had quite a bit of property, a house, detached stone kitchen, garden and orchard. He auctioned. Whoops. Next, we've got Pastor Hanson. Yeah, that's it. Who came to Mount Gambier in 1881, 2 years after Marshall's retirement. But he was the first Australian pastor to study in America and return to work in the ministry in Australia. So they've got a couple of firsts there in Mount Gambier. Ministered until 1885, but numbers were starting to dwindle, and he left to go to Emu Downs in South Australia. Pastor Stremple was the next one. He came 1885 to 1901, and the membership dwindled to such an extent that the congregation closed. In January 1886, Harndorf teacher graduate Eduard Stremple began teaching in the building formerly used by teacher Straub in 1861, and he advertised the Mount Gambier Academy. Yeah. He's going to inform the public of Mount Gambier that he's going to open a German and English school on February the 1st, also an evening school on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. The one down the bottom is 1887. And I found a photograph of his class in the history of the Lutheran Church in Mount Gambier. Strempel worked as a teacher until about 1898, and then he became an AMP life assurance salesman, and he earned a gold medal for selling over £1 million of insurance between 1898 and 1938. Well, that's a massive amount. This is the only photograph of the Bowendick Terrace Church, and they also had their own cemetery in their church ground, gazetted in 1864 beside the church, and used until 1907, and 76 burials occurred there. Closing of the evangelical congregation. Numbers declined, largely due to families leaving the area, and it formally closed in 1901. The remaining members went to St Martin's. St Martin's members, that's the other Lutheran church, became trustees of the Bowendick property. By 1930, the cemetery and land had become overgrown and unkempt, with many headstones and graves in ruin. So in 1966, the cemetery area was turned into a park, with some of the headstones being salvaged and erected in St Martin's churchyard. And that's just a photograph of the remnants of the headstones as they are in St Martin's. And this is where the church used to be, as it is today. The memorial lists the names of the 76 people who are buried there. I'll just get closer. There's some memorial stones. It's interesting that I think it's the Lions Club have put that plaque. It's dedicated to the forefathers of the Lutheran community who endured great hardships during the early years of settlement in this area. Oops. There we go. Our tour group in 2019 at Marshall Park. And these are the names of family names buried in that cemetery. I'm not going to read them all. They're in alphabetical order, so you might find yours there. All right, we'll proceed. Oops. I hope the battery's not going funny here. St Martin's Lutheran Church in Edward Street. We're not quite sure when it started, so that's why I've got the question mark there, but it's still going today. Pastor Kapler visited Mount Gambier in 1860, possibly made several trips, and on one visit he was persuaded to stay and establish a congregation by Dr Wehl. Their church was erected in 1862, and that's a photograph, early photograph of the church without its tower that it has today. The interior is pretty much the same. That's what it looks like today. They've got that interesting blue behind the altar. St Martin's with its tower, that was added in 1905, as the church is today. Now, Pastor Kapler, their first pastor, he emigrated from Saxony in 1848, accompanied by his wife and 6 children. He chose not to join the existing Australian Lutheran synods. Of interesting spelling there. Ministered to German Protestants in Adelaide, Harndorf, Hope Valley Borough, Victorian Goldfields and Melbourne. First visited Mount Gambier in 1860, December, and Dr Wehl pressured him to stay. So he organised regular services in the National School building and travelled once, sometimes twice a year, to Adelaide via Port Macdonald to visit his family, who did not move to Mount Gambier. He ministered at St Martin's until his death on the 3rd of June 1877 from dropsy. And we all know that that's a swelling due to excessive accumulation of fluid, today known as edema. Right, 2 rooms were built as Kepler's manse on an allotment in Claraville, both the building and the land being a gift of Dr Wehl. St Martin's Church was also built on this allotment. So they're just 2 photographs of the building from different angles. Kepler's grave in the Lake Terrace Cemetery, that's what it looks like, with its headstone in German. A plaque funded by the Wendish Society of South Australia, the Wendish Heritage Society Australia and St Martin's Lutheran Congregation Mount Gambier was unveiled on the 10th of March 2024. It acknowledges Andreas Kepler as the only Wendish Lutheran pastor to emigrate to Australia. And right down on the bottom of the plaque is a little acknowledgement in Wendish, which says, "May he rest in peace." So we put, that's why we went there in 2024. Because somebody in 2019 said, because when we said that he was a Wendish pastor, somebody said, well, you should put a plaque on his grave to say that. So it took us a little while, but we got it done in 2024. Because there were 3 groups funding it, you know, that takes a little bit of organising. And this is the day of the unveiling of the plaque. And my goodness, it was a hot day too. It was very hot, wasn't it, Lyle? And that's the Sorbian flag there that we're holding. Wow. St Martin's second pastor was Friedrich Matchos, who came in 1878, and he had a very long ministry there till 1923. He came to Australia in 1878 and was ordained when he arrived. So he must have already been trained but not ordained, and installed at St Martin's that same year. And a lot of additions were made to the church during his ministry, but he was there for quite a few years, wasn't he? 45 years. He went to Emmanuel Light's Pass in 1923. This was the manse, and you can see the church in the background, and so see the spire of the church. They had a sadness in their family. Pastor took his daughter, eldest daughter, who was about 4, to visit somebody out at Compton, I think, one of his parishioners, and while they were there, she was crushed by a sledge that she must have pulled down on herself accidentally, and yeah, she died. This is the headstone for Pastor Johann Peter Nicke, I pronounce it that way, who died aged 91 in 1903. After his retirement in 1894, Pastor Nicke went to live in Mount Gambier with his daughter, who was Augusta Matchos, the wife of Pastor. After her death in 1907, she was buried with her father here. Oh, here we are, nearly at the end. William Kohler and Henrietta Nee Clapperoth, golden wedding celebration. Now, this is an advertisement in the newspaper, a golden matrimony commemoration. I'm not going to read it all. And down the bottom it says, Golden Jubilee Marriage Anniversary. Right, this was reported in the Border Watch on the 18th of November. The anniversary itself was November the 18th. Okay, same day. A golden marriage. On Wednesday last, the interesting ceremony known among our German friends as a golden marriage or jubilee took place in the Evangelical Lutheran Chapel, Mount Gambier, on the 50th anniversary of the marriage of Mr. H.W. Kohler and Henrietta W. Nee Klaproth, falling upon that day. A few of our English readers will know anything of this ceremony. As few of our English readers will know anything of this ceremony, we may as well explain what it is. When a German married couple reach the 25th anniversary of their marriage, they celebrate the event with a religious ceremony and a great rejoicing, and the wife is crowned with a silver wreath by her friends. This is called her silver marriage. Should they live to see the 50th anniversary, the event is celebrated in like manner, but with greater pomp and ceremony, the event being comparatively so rare. And the lady this time is crowned with a golden wreath. And I think we've all seen photographs of anniversaries where the bride, the wife, is wearing a wreath on her head. In Germany, not only the immediate family friends of the couple interested attend these celebrations, but also all the leading families of the district, and very often the king or the emperor himself. So I guess in Germany they had smaller provinces, city-states and whatnot, so it's not like the Queen of England coming perhaps, or the King of England, but very important people anyway. We believe this is the first event of the kind that has been celebrated in Australia. The aged couple are aged respectively 75 and 68 and were married on the 15th day of November 1815. There was the venerable old gentleman with his lady sitting on chairs before the altar, with all his children and many of his grandchildren around him, and both looking the picture of health and happiness. There were besides a good number of German friends present, and also a good many English ladies who all joined in the services. After singing in prayer, the Reverend Marshal then explained that the jubilant chose his own text, which he said was from Psalms chapter 119, 124 to 128. He then preached a most excellent sermon in which he referred to past mercies and exhorted them to trust and hold fast to the true faith even until the end. After the sermon, they again sang another hymn, and before singing the last verse, the venerable old gentleman and his lady knelt down before the altar, and the reverend put a hand on the head of each of them, pronounced a blessing upon them, after which the congregation sung the last verse and were dismissed, which I thought was an interesting word. The relatives and the reverend gentleman then drove off to Mr. Garley's schoolroom, where a most excellent dinner was provided for them, of which they all partook heartily. There they enjoyed themselves until late in the evening, and afterwards they joined in singing hymns, and the Reverend Marshal prayed, and then they separated to their respective dwellings. I may mention that Mr. Wilhelm Kohler is perhaps the only one in South Australia of the remaining veterans of the Peninsular War, and served in the Hanoverian Division and obtained a medal in 1813 for distinguished services. And I found a most interesting, to me anyway, little snippet in Mr. Kohler's obituary, because he died in 1868, only a short time after this ceremony. This was in 1865. He died in June 1868. Mr. Kohler, Wilhelm Kohler, arrived in 1849 on the Augusta Melina and had gone on from Adelaide in another ship to Port Lincoln, and then on by bullock dray to join Pastor Sherman on the Lutheran mission. And I thought, oh, I did not know that. In 1860, he moved to Mount Gambier, where he would have met up again with Sherman who was coming across from Hokiirk. I thought, oh, how good is that? We don't know who was involved very much in the missions in Port Lincoln anyway, but I think some of those letters, reports that were written are being translated at the moment into English. So we might be able to find more about Wilhelm Kohler. And there are other connections. This is my closing comment now. There are other connections between Mount Gambier and places like Natimuc, for example. Now, quite a few families from Mount Gambier moved to Natimuc, and some of those are Gladigo, Klaus, the a Wendish family, Tollner, some of the Tollner family. Mr. Tollner, who actually first came to Mount Gambier, he went to Natimuc for about 20 years and then retired back to Mount Gambier. The Hirth, members of the Hirth family, Sudoltz, Nichteline, Bowen families, those names are quite common around the Natimuc area. Others went up to Nil, other families went across to Matoa area. So it's just interesting how families spread out. The same thing happened probably from Western Victoria, families in the 1870s when land became open for selection in the Wimmera. The next generation moved up north because all the land has been selected where they're living and growing up, but there's new land available in the Wimmera, so they go. And that's what's happened with these Natimuc people in particular. And those families are sort of interconnected. Some of them are interconnected with the Sherman family too, who also, some Pastor Sherman's, two of Pastor Sherman's sons went up to that area. So Nichteline is in the Sherman family, Sudoltz in the Sherman family, Sudoltz from Gillis Plains are involved. And that is, I don't know. I think the battery's getting tired. Anyway, thank you. I hope that I have given you some new information or something to think about. I'm not an expert on this area at all. It's just that I happen to prepare something for our dinner that we have at our Wendish weekends away, and somebody here remembered that and thought that I'd be good for this evening. So thank you very much. Goodbye to people who are watching in Victoria. And that's it.
Thanks, Betty. Now, is there any questions anybody got?
Question.
Covered everything.
Oh, have I? No, I just I scraped the surface.
You scraped the surface. You did an amazing job, I think you call it. Well, if there's no questions, I'll call on Lois again to move a vote of thanks.
Now, where is Betty so I can look at her while I thank her? Thank you very much, Betty. That was, thank you very much indeed for such a colourful and entertaining, thorough, you have indeed given us, as well as much entertainment, very much for thought. I must say, this is the culmination of an ambition I have had for decades for Friends of Lutheran Archives to have a talk about the German community of Mount Gambier, because I think that that we really have until now known very little about it. It's quite appropriate, absolutely appropriate, that you've come across the border to tell us this story, because as you say, the closest place, the closest church, the closest Lutheran pastor was 85 miles away in Hochkirch. When Germans were gathering in this area, it took weeks to travel overland from the nearest Lutheran or German settlement, or indeed from any settlement. When in South Australia, they were simply so remote. As you said, they kept asking the church council to send them a pastor. And, well, you couldn't find anybody who could drop in even once a year to minister to them on this side of the border. When they finally got in touch with Pastor Michael, they said to him, they wanted him to come and give a demonstration sermon, an audition, if you like. But they said, don't worry about the travel. You just get on a boat and come down here by boat. It's really very easy. And at that time, that was 1863, it was still very difficult, very laborious to travel overland to Mount Gambier. So so the revelations come from the east, from Victoria on this occasion for us. Yes, it's been really, I'm sure you will all, except for those who come from Mount Gambier, of course, this has been truly interesting. And I was also very glad to see that you pointed out that the German and the English communities mixed. It's amazing how thoroughly German they were. They had everything that you had to have. 2 churches, a German club, a Liedertafel, an orchestra, a library, plenty of cafes and a brewer, and everything, and of course a famous... And a distiller, and of course yes, what was I going to add? A cafe and, well, a silversmith. The South Australian jewellers were so famous at that time, and you needed to have a famous one amongst down there as well, who incidentally made one of them made a beautiful cup for Michael to celebrate the 20th anniversary of his ordination, which occurred while he was down there. But yes, so a really interesting story, and one that we've been waiting for a long time. I heard that you had given this talk to the Wens, and I thought, why keep it? Leave it to the Wens. We all need to hear it. So thank you very much for coming across and telling us. And I'll let Jeff hand over your South Australian gift.
Okay, well, thank you. I just remembered, oh, I get one for each hand, do I? Well, thank you. I just remembered you talking about shipping to, easy to get the boat to Port Macdonald. That Carl Engelbrecht told the story that when he came to Australia, he actually missed the boat at Melbourne, I think. He wanted to go to Adelaide, so he got on the Admella.
No.
He did. He got on the Admella and he went to Adelaide. On the return trip from Adelaide, the Admella hit the Carpenter Rocks. Yeah, so he told it. Yes, that's right, it did. I've forgotten that little interesting snippet.
Lovely, thank you.
I can sit down now.
Yes, well, don't drink it all before you get home. But we certainly sincerely thank you, as Lois said, and for somebody who wasn't quite sure about what to do to come up with so much information is amazing. And a lot of those German names aren't really familiar to many of us either. Well, not to me, perhaps.
Not to me either, I
must be a newcomer around here. But so look, thank you so much. You put so much work into this here, and we really appreciate that. And
thank you.
Safe travelling back home. As you...
We have to pay tax.
we are a federation now.
The toll house is not manned at the moment.
Okay, yeah. So look, you're all welcome to join us for supper tonight over in the church hall.
And the book?
Yeah, hang on, just a minute. And as you're going out, the Carvel book, Helen will be out in the passageway there. If you want a copy or more than one copy of those, $35. And the other one that we spoke about was the Wendish one that Lila's got over here, and they're $25 each. So have a feast of information there, and you know, hopefully this year there'll still be more publications coming out. So there's a feast of reading to be done. So our next meeting is next month. It's not up there now, but hopefully we get a good attendance again, and we have some more speakers from Victoria, and so that'll be a different story again with the Hermannsburg connection. So thank you all. Yes, Jamie.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yes, I'll certainly do that. Yes.
Betty's a very busy person these days in retirement, and not only in giving talks but also in stuff that she writes, and I hope you've got plenty of energy to keep doing this for a long time.
Oh. Yes.
You can sort of see that she's a very knowledgeable person in whatever she presents and very thorough with her research, so well done.
Right,
Okay, so look, we've got these two books here and supper out there. Hopefully everybody signed in before, and if you haven't, do so. We're still looking for people to pay the memberships as well, and so people here or watching online, we'd appreciate if you can pay your membership. And we also invite new members too, so there's a form there you can take with you for that. So thank you very much for coming along here tonight.
Yes, thank you. I'm honoured that you came out. Thank you.